This video is about the visual legacy of slavery in America. How is art used to visualize racial stereotypes? How does the way race is depicted perpetuate an oppressive framework? How are these stereotypes being used today? When I think of early American depictions of racism, I immediately think of minstrel shows. Minstrel shows emerged in New York in the 1830s with Thomas Rice's character, Jim Crow. Minstrels were white men in blackface, typically covered in shoe polish, dressed in dirty, tattered clothes. These performances were meant to mock enslaved black people, perpetuating ideas of them being lazy, ignorant, hypersexual, untrustworthy, and cowardly. These shows were meant for a white audience, particularly in places where their interactions with Black Americans was limited in northern and midwestern cities. After emancipation in 1863, the stereotypes spread by these shows further affected Black Americans during the fight for civil rights. Once new media came around, blackface was taken to the big screen, and only within the last few decades has it started to be frowned upon in mainstream entertainment. Even though blackface in the traditional sense has been phased out, white people are always finding new ways to perpetuate the same stereotypes through caricatures in popular media. Now, in order to understand the stereotypes and where they originate, we need to see them in their earliest forms from the antebellum South. The antebellum, or before war period, was between 1815 and 1861. Southern states of the U.S. in this period relied economically on agriculture, which was sustained by slave labor. While there was a small elite class of white plantation owners, most white people actually worked small subsistence farms or held jobs and did not own slaves. But even though they were not slave owners, members of this lower class still supported slavery. This is because the subjugation of black people kept them from occupying the lowest rung of the social ladder. This desire to remain a head above the lowest social class heavily encouraged the popularity of the negative stereotypes of black people, even after emancipation. Emerging from this context, we will get some archetypical artwork of popular racial caricatures such as Mammies, Uncle Toms, Jezebels, and Pickaninnies. For this part of the video, I will mostly be referencing articles posted by the Jim Crow Museum at Ferris State University, written by Dr. David Pilgrim. Thank you, Dr. Pilgrim. Perhaps the most popular caricature is the Mammy. The standard for Mammies comes from Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Aunt Chloe is the prototypical fictional Mammy. She's self-sacrificing and fat. She's a pleasant and loyal housekeeper, and most importantly, she is asexual. Pilgrim states that the implicit assumption was this: no reasonable white man would choose a fat, elderly black woman instead of the idealized white woman. The black mammy was portrayed as lacking all sexual and sensual qualities. The de-eroticism of mammy meant that the white wife, and by extension the white family, was safe. Mammy made it into the mainstream primarily from advertising. Her image was used to sell household items like food and detergent and sewing accessories, items that are typically used by a woman to take care of the home. Examples include Aunt Sally, depicted on 1875 baking powders, and Aunt Jemima in the 1890s. Uncle Tom's Cabin also ignited the popularity of the stereotypical Uncle Tom. The title character in the book is a, quote, large, broad-chested, powerfully made man whose truly African features were characterized by an expression of grave and steady good sense, united with much kindliness and benevolence, end quote. The caricature Uncle Tom is submissive, obedient, and constantly desiring white approval. Tom is a happy and dependable server, field worker, butler, etc. Stowe uses Tom's character to show the gentleness and forgiving nature which she believed lay dormant in all Black people. In the early 1900s, Uncle Tom became the first Black character in American film, but of course, all of these early depictions were by white actors in blackface. Tom is depicted by Black actors in later films like Gone with the Wind and Driving Miss Daisy and Fried Green Tomatoes. Similar to Mammies, Toms were also used to sell products starting in the late 1800s. Some examples are Dixon's Cabaret of Iron Stove Polish, Uncle Obadiah, Uncle Ben's Brand Rice, and Rastus the Cream of Wheat Cook. Now, Jezebels are Black women that are seen as seductive, beguiling, and lewd. They were made to be the opposite of the desirable image of a modest and pure white woman. The idea of Black people being inherently lewd comes from before slavery, when Europeans saw African natives' semi-nudeness, polygamy, and tribal dances as proof of their uncontrollable lust. Europeans saw them as animal-like and unintelligent and used this framework to justify slavery. During slavery, ideas of sexual promiscuity were further reinforced by the conditions that slaves were put in. They would often be stripped naked on display for sale. In this time, nakedness was seen as a lack of sexual restraint, even when it was forced. This was in contrast to the modest and pure white woman who wore clothing over most of her body. The Jezebel stereotype was then used as a rationalization for sexual relations between slavers and the enslaved. She was seen as a rousing temptress, so when a white man rapes a slave, it's not rape because she wanted it, or even trick the man to appease her appetite. Enslaved women were considered property, so legally they could not be raped. Now, the Pickaninny was the most popular caricature of Black children. They had large bulging eyes, messy hair, large red lips, and wide mouths, often stuffed with watermelon. They are routinely shown on postcards being chased or eaten by alligators. These children are typically depicted in few or no clothes, suggesting that they or their parents are not concerned with modesty, or perhaps the parents are neglectful. Either way, it serves to show how white people saw Black people as less civilized than them. The nudity also introduces the problem of sexualizing Black children. Their nude bottoms are often exaggerated in size, and their sexual abuse is made light of. Coming from this context, how have Black artists of the post-civil rights era reckoned with these pervasive stereotypes? Some Black artists of more modern times have been making a statement through appropriating them in art. An interesting take on this appropriation comes from Professor of Art and Art History Richard J. Powell's Going There, a Black Visual Satire. In this book, he discusses how Black artists take these caricatures that are meant to mock Black people as ironic devices to make a statement on the politics of race in the modern post-civil rights era. One of the most known examples of Black visual satire is Betty Saar's The Liberation of Aunt Jemima. This assemblage, made in 1972, features a figure of the Mammy caricature with her defining features of pitch black skin, big red lips, and a heavy-set body. Behind the figure is a Warhol-esque wallpaper of Aunt Jemima logos, and at her feet is Cotton, a straightforward reference to Cotton's association with slavery. Saar contrasts the image of the submissive mammy with the ominous threat of the gun and grenade in her hands. The portrait at the figure's waist depicts another mammy with a white baby, which is then contrasted by the bottom of this mammy's dress being transformed into a black fist, a symbol of Black power. Sarr uses this piece to show her allegiance to the Black Power movement and changes the mammy from a servile figure to one that seeks revenge for a history of oppression. The audience at the time seemed to understand Sarr's goal, seeing the mammy imagery juxtaposed with her arsenal as the ironic statement that she intended. The liberation of Aunt Jemima served as an irony-filled effigy that, by using negative and inflammatory imagery, symbolically saved viewers from the negative effects of the stereotypes, subverting it for spiritual and revolutionary purposes. Now, Robert Colescott has, similarly to Sarr, appropriated the mammy caricature, Aunt Jemima, but in a less uplifting way. He often takes irony and satire to the extreme, as is exemplified in his 1968 drawing Jemima's Pancakes. Colescott places Aunt Jemima with all of her mammy features in the foreground of the work. Behind her is a series of sexually explicit scenes between her and another caricature mascot, Colonel Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken. In this depiction, Colescott contrasts the asexual nature of the mammy by placing her into an interracial relationship with the white mascot. This work is very different in tone to Sarr's liberating work of the same caricature. Jemima's Pancakes mocks the efforts towards salvaging the stereotype and makes a made-up company merger into a pornographic escapade between two asexual mascots. With this, Colescott makes a statement of sexual egalitarianism that was very radical for the time. And Colescott also uses his crass depictions of caricatures to denounce and satirize white supremacy and power imbalances, most popularly through parodies of well-known artworks. An excellent example is Robert Colescott's George Washington Carver crossing the Delaware, page from an American history textbook. This work directly addresses the source of inspiration, Emanuel Lutz's 1851 history painting, George Washington Crossing the Delaware. The farce that Colescott presents in this work both disparages American myths of greatness and chastises human shortcomings and delusions of grandeur by way of racial caricatures. By placing smiling, big-lipped, bulgy-eyed figures such as Mammies and Toms together on the same boat as the figures holding the American flag, he conflates the joy of flag-hugging patriots to the uncivilized and drunken way that Black people have been depicted in this nation's history. And Colescott is often criticized for his appropriations. Critics called this particular painting a racist diatribe against African American men. Colescott believes that his work is more than a one-dimensional denigration of stereotype, but a complicated, multi-dimensional satire. He employs stereotypes as a tool, like parody and irony, that can be used within satire to attack an object of criticism. Concerning this painting, Colescott has said, quote, "Ever since I started doing these appropriations, there's been criticism, and I was surprised at the criticism. I thought everybody would get it. We've already come to understand it's about white perception of Black people, and they may not be pretty, and they may be stupid. We didn't make these images up, so why should we take the heat? But it's satire. It's the satire that kills the serpent, you know." End quote. The last artist I want to mention is Kara Walker. Walker takes direct inspiration from Robert Colescott in her work and has even made her own rendition of Colescott's George Washington Carver. Walker's signature style uses Black stereotypes as a vehicle to depict the psychological impact of racism. She uses silhouettes of slaves and masters, making her own tales of abuse, fetishism, and violence. She often uses mammies and pickaninnies as characters in her work, and she has said that she self-identifies with the slave mistress, the abused young slave woman in her narratives. Walker's trauma from her own experience of racial intolerance, especially while dating white men, contributes to the conflicts that she expresses in her work. Walker has come under criticism for her work as being too degrading to Black people. One of her biggest critics is, ironically, Betty Saar, who justifies her own use of racial caricatures by claiming that she makes her anti racism message clear, while Walker leaves her work up for interpretation. Walker has also been critiqued for her popularity among a mostly white audience of collectors. Walker is aware of this, but she is more concerned about her voice being heard. She refuses to let the uncomfortable truths of slavery be ignored by modern American scholars who would rather not contemplate them. So, what do you think? Have any of these artists taken the appropriations of stereotypes too far? Is it regressive to reuse images that were historically used to degrade Black people for another purpose? Personally, I believe it is important that we face the realities of racism. While it is uncomfortable to think about, these oppressive stereotypes are deeply rooted into American history. Understanding the framework of historic oppression can help us dissect the systems of oppression we live under today. Those artists chose to use crude and offensive imagery because they want the viewer to look directly into America's ugly past. The viewer should be unsettled. They should sit with that feeling and reckon with it.